My talk is mostly directed towards students, but it also has a component that's relevant to the faculty and administration. Now, all you students had to make a decision, perhaps not very long ago. Do I major in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, computer science, chemistry, etc.? I think you have like 15 options here now for degrees. I claim there's a more fundamental decision than that you need to be thinking about. And that basic decision is described in the two options I've shown on the opening slide. Do you want to work for a large company and get what you might perceive to be a secure career? Or do you want to take a risk, start your own company, be your own boss, and only work for one person, that's yourself? So I'm going to discuss some of the options, some of the details of those options that are available to you. And frankly, I'm going to encourage you to take the first option. I've worked on this presentation. In fact, I have 60 slides. I'm not going to cover all of those today, but if you want the presentation and you're interested in the data that I've used for the conclusions I've drawn, just send me an email. I'll send you the file, and you're welcome to it. I had Brian Trilly look this over and made several suggestions. Brian and I had lunch together in Albuquerque about a month ago. Brian is a Kettering student, a mechanical engineering graduate who is an entrepreneur. I think has his fourth company. He's not been out of school more than like 4 years, but he's got a startup that he's doing now that he thinks is going to be very, very successful. The major points are divided into three major categories: the U.S. economy, entrepreneurship, and then what are some of the things Kettering might do to produce more and more entrepreneurs from the student body and from the faculty as well. Now, I'm not going to dwell on the slide, but what I wanted to show you is that most of you are working for manufacturing companies. Am I not correct? Do you realize that employment in those companies? I want you to look at the manufacturing line and look how it's declined. When I first started looking at some of these issues in the late 1980s, I remember the data point was that manufacturing was 15% of employment. Look where it is now. What's happening is technology. It's not that we're not producing more than we were in the early years. It's just the productivity has gotten so high. To give you a benchmark, in the 1970s, General Electric had a facility in Louisville, Kentucky called Appliance Park, where they made most all their appliances. Had like 20,000 employees. They moved most of that facility to China because of lower labor rates. Now they're bringing it back. They are producing more appliances in Louisville, Kentucky today than they were 40 years ago, but I think their employment peak is about 3,500 people, not 20,000. And that's happening all over the world as productivity is growing. The economy is undergoing major changes. In fact, it's interesting, most of us, most of the older people that are in here, but that are around my age or perhaps a few years younger, we grew up with a middle class, where that was the large income group in America was the so-called middle class income. That group is being hollowed away. The lower part of that group is becoming less and less affluent. The higher part of that group, a few every year, is going into a fairly elite income group. In fact, there's a professor at George Mason University, Tyler Cowan, who's written a book called The End of Work, where Tyler's expressed a lot of concern about what are people going to do in 20 or 30 or 40 years when machines are doing all the work. So what kind of jobs are we going to have? And The Economist, a magazine that I've read regularly and thoroughly, by the way, for the last 25 years, has been addressing that. In fact, the January 18th issue was almost entirely devoted to that. So all of you students that are interested in this subject, drop by the library and take a read of the January 18th copy. The cartoon they had in that article shows professions floating in the sea. they've fallen overboard and they're no longer needed. They're arguing that there's major professions that exist today that in 20 years there'll be no need for people to do those jobs. So we're undergoing rapid change for the first time in a long time. Technology is destroying jobs. Technology innovation is destroying jobs faster than it's creating new jobs. So I want the focus to be, what are those new jobs that are being created, and what role might you play in helping create those new jobs? And frankly, I've seen Gallup polls of people all over the world. The number one concern of people all over the world is finding what they consider to be a good job. I mean, a job that pays well, that has some degree of stability associated with it. So I don't think there's anything you could do, if you're looking at this from the point of view of you want to do something to serve society. Frankly, I don't think there's very many things you could do that's more noble than creating a company that creates jobs for people. And I assure you those people would appreciate it. So if there's a component of this, it's more than just getting rich, because you can create a company and get rich. But if you create jobs for people, there's very few things you could do for people that's more helpful to them than that. Another thing that's happening is, I'm sure you're aware, you heard the president's speech, and he talked about the immigration bill. Buried in the immigration bill is a component that's going to impact your career that nobody talks about. They talk about legal and illegal immigrants, and do they get approval to stay here in the U.S., et cetera. That's the major debatable element of the immigration bill. This immigration bill that he talked about passed the Senate last year, and I think this year Mr. Boehner is going to push it through the House. So this is what I've shown here is a slide that has that basically is going to make it a lot easier for the U.S. to bring many, many more immigrant engineers into the country. And the impact of that on salaries, if you work for a large company, I think this means the supply of engineers is going to be high enough that you can expect your salary to stagnate. It's that simple. In fact, I'll show you some data that shows it's already stagnated. I got this off the web last night. It was sent by the staff director of IEEE. This is starting salaries last year, the 10 top starting salaries in the U.S. Of those 10 salaries, 7 are for engineers. Now, I did 1963, I graduated with a BS degree in electrical engineering, and I took a job at Sandia National Labs in New Mexico. I said, I wonder how I did relative to today's starting salary. So I looked up cost of living adjustments between 1963 and 2013. Guess what the factor is? Professor Bell, you want to take a guess? What you'd have to multiply my starting salary times to put it in 2013 dollars.
What would you started in 1963?
I did.
The same year I started teaching here.
Okay.
So you and I started our careers in exactly the same year.
Yes, we did.
So I know approximately what I was making when I started teaching.
Okay. Well,
Factor of 10.
it's actually a factor of 8. Very good guess, good estimate. It's a factor of 8. Guess what my starting salary was? It was almost exactly the average starting salary. But I want to tell you that I think I got a better deal than you're going to get. Because why? First of all, I only had to work till noon. I worked from 8 till noon, my first 2 years of work. Worked from 8 to noon. The company paid for my graduate school enrollment. In fact, a condition of my employment was that I successfully completed a master's degree. They paid all the tuition and gave me time off from work. So I was making, in 2013 dollars, I was making exactly the average double E salary. And by the way, that was not my best offer. So the higher offers were above $63,000 in 2013 dollars in those years. And the company offered me a deal that very few companies are offering today. So what's the moral of the story is that starting salaries for engineers look good, but the truth is they're flat. Over the career of an engineer, IEEE has huge bank of salary data on engineers. What they show is that over your lifetime, in terms of real dollars, your salary will roughly double, and starting salaries are flat. It's been that way for 20 or 30 years, and it'll probably, if it stays that way for the next 20, 30 years, it'll be good. My guess is the probability with all the immigrant engineers coming to the U.S., it will actually go down because the supply is growing faster than the demand. So I don't want to, what I'm trying to do here is to paint a picture for you that are thinking, gee, I want to go to work for a large company. It's going to be stable. I'm going to get paid really well. I want you to start to look at that with a little suspicion. I also would urge you when you're working for a large company, look around at those 55-year-old engineers and see what they're doing. And imagine that's you in 40 years. Or no, not even 40 years, 30 years. Imagine that that's you. And is that where you want to be? Is that what you want to be doing? And when they start complaining about the fact that they can't change jobs or that they haven't gotten a salary increase for several years, just remember, in 30 years, that's where you're going to be. So I'm encouraging you to start your own company, work for yourself. In fact, looking at this from the altruistic point of view, as I said in my opening, who is creating jobs in the U.S.? It's startup companies. In fact, I just got this data out of the Atlantic from the November issue, in which this one of the writers, excuse me, has been researching this. And what they show is that large corporations have dips in employment, and sometimes they come back cumulatively to almost where they were before. But very few new jobs are being created by large corporations. In fact, very few new jobs are being created by what are necessarily small corporations. It's a subset of small corporations, and that's the new small corporations. Generally, companies less than 5 years old have created almost all the new jobs in the U.S. And that's certainly been the case over the post-recession recovery period. So what are some of the things that's going on that people are using to start new jobs with? Well, the best I can project or figure out and I've looked at a number of resources, is one of the things that's happening is what's being referred to as the Internet of Things. An example of that is basically large machines are being monitored with sensors, measuring various properties of the machine, how it's aging, how it's wearing, communicating that over a wireless link, putting it on the internet. The next big thing that's going to happen in your kitchen is you'll be able to control all your appliances from your cell phone. What's amazing to me is how sales in this area are projected to be. I found 3 sources of data on that. We're talking about something that by 2020, 6 years, could be almost as large as the U.S. economy. In fact, the U.S. economy is $16.7 trillion this year is projected to be. So we're talking about something that's going to create a new economy as big as the U.S. economy, spread all over the entire world. What are some of the things that generate opportunities for entrepreneurs? I see 4 major things that cause opportunity to be generated for entrepreneurs. First of all, technology innovation. Every time there's a new technology, if you can figure out how to apply that new technology, you don't have to invent the new technology, for goodness sakes. But if you'll figure out how to use it to do something nobody else has done before, that's the basis for starting a new company. Another one is regulatory changes. In my packet, I've got a good friend from Sandia who started a new company. The basis for his new company is completely and totally based on new regulations regarding licensing of reactor facilities. And the fact that it's going to be harder and harder to get a license for a nuclear reactor facility if the enrichment of the uranium is above a certain threshold. And this is making, by the way, this is making Tectinium-99, which is a radioactive material that's used for medical diagnostics, used principally for heart diagnostics. It's a $300 million a year market. The basis for his company is a regulatory change. Major problems. If you can come up with a solution to some major problem, that's a market. There's a market there if it's a problem. And then changes in the economy create new opportunities. The big change in the economy that you're seeing already taking place is the concentration of wealth is leading companies to go after, basically ignore the mass market and go after high income opportunities. For example, I saw that JetBlue, which had one class of seating, has now converting to first class seats because there's people that have the money to buy that. In fact, about 10% of the US population can buy whatever they want. So if you can figure out something that they might want to buy, you've got a company. So what are some of the technologies that the new startups are basing their companies upon? Open source software, cloud computing, and social networks. It's the most common technologies that are being used in new startups. If you want to be an entrepreneur, I think you have to teach yourself to be a strategic thinker. There's basically 3 things you have to do to be strategic. First of all, you have to have a vision. You have to have a vision for where you want to be. By the way, this reasoning applies to people as well as organizations. If you learn to be strategic, your probability of success is going to be much, much higher. Even if you don't become an entrepreneur, but it's especially true for entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs have a small margin for error. In other words, you can fall off the cliff a lot easier as an entrepreneur than you can if you work for a large company. So first, you have to have a vision for where you're going to be. Secondly, you have to be able to assess your current status, but assess it relative to that vision. It's called SWOT analysis. And then third, you have to make a plan to move from where you are and figure out what you have to do to accomplish that vision. If you learn to think this way, I promise you it will help you through your entire life, even if you go work for a large company. It's a very effective and practical way to think about things. Visions are really important. February is African American Month in the US, and we just recently celebrated the Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. It's a holiday. He gave one of the most important speeches that I've ever heard given, and his delivery of that speech was remarkable and moving. I still like to listen to the speech. It's so inspirational. You could substitute in Dr. Martin Luther King's speech, everywhere he said, "I have a dream," you could substitute the word vision. I have a vision. But it wouldn't have connected with the people like it did. But that's basically what his speech was. He was articulating a vision for race relationships. That's what his speech was. Now, as you are in the process of developing your strategy, what you're going to find is lots of organizations have a way of doing things. And here's my take on that is most organizations focus on mission, not vision. So they have processes they follow. And so if you try to develop a new vision for any organization, including Kettering, you're likely to find that to get from today's status to reaching that vision, you're going to come in conflict with barriers. A bureaucrat, which to me is the worst name you can call somebody. I would rather have my birthright challenged than to be called a bureaucrat. It ranks right up there with some of those words you may be thinking about right now. What you have to do is, if you want to be an entrepreneur and you are trying to map out a strategy, you're going to find that there will be barriers along the way, and you have to figure out how to get around those barriers. And one of the biggest barriers is how to get money. How do I get the money to start this company? So an entrepreneur has to be nimble on their feet and figure out how to work their way around barriers and limitations. Some of the things I think I'm sure those of you that have done any reading about entrepreneurs understand. I've heard the term entrepreneur's mindset. I was calling that entrepreneurs think big, think for yourself, think confidently. You don't have to be the world's smartest person to be a successful entrepreneur, but you have to be very determined. Think differently. Look at things, and if you find you're looking at things and seeing them like everybody else, you're probably not a good candidate to be an entrepreneur. You need to be able to look at things and see something else, see something different than conventional think, and think opportunity. So look at problems as opportunities. Now, there's basically, it's very interesting. I've been studying job creation in the U.S. in the post-recession period, and all the job creation is occurring one of two ways. About a third of the new jobs are occurring in energy. And it's largely a result of new oil discoveries in places like North Dakota and South Dakota, as well as the fracking. By the way, you saw those high salaries for petroleum engineers. That's why those petroleum engineers are being paid $97,000 a year. There's a boom in this country in natural gas exploration and in oil exploration. Cities like Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Houston are all prospering due to new job creation associated with oil and gas discoveries. But two-thirds of the new jobs in this country that are being created out of what people are referring to as economic, or some people call them economic ecosystems, other people call them entrepreneurship ecosystems. Places like Silicon Valley is a massive economic ecosystem. But you may not know that Salt Lake City has become a major economic ecosystem. And through the economic downturn, Salt Lake City's economy grew over 3.5% every year. They did not experience a recession. There's selected places like that all over the U.S. City leaders are studying this. Everybody wants to create one. Where I live near Albuquerque, New Mexico, the University of New Mexico is trying their darndest. I collaborate with the guy that works on this for the president. They're really working hard to create an economic ecosystem there that will create jobs. Why? Because we're not growing. We're stagnant. We're the kind of the hole in the donut surrounded by the west at Phoenix, which is growing, Salt Lake City to the northwest, which is growing, Denver to the north, which is growing, Dallas, Austin in Texas. All around us, cities are growing, have massive economic ecosystems that are producing entrepreneurs that are starting new companies, but not us. We lived off the federal dole for way too long, and people don't know how to recover from it, frankly. By the way, your tradition here, I'm sure you all know about Charles Kettering, but did you know that Charles Kettering was A, rich, and B, made himself rich not by being Vice President of General Motors. He was already rich when he was Vice President of General Motors. He became rich by being an entrepreneur. I bet you Professor Bell was fully aware of that. Yes, sir. He became rich by being an engineer.
This is terrific.
Thank you. Another thing I want to remind you, did you listen to the President's State of the Union speech? He made reference to Kettering grad in that speech. But most of his speech, that was the good news in his speech. Most of his speech was bad news. Average wages have barely budged, inequalities deepened, upward mobility has stalled. Too many Americans are working more than ever just get by, let alone get ahead, and too many still aren't working at all. Unemployment has come down more slowly in this post-recession period than any previous recession. So what I'm thinking about is Kettering University creating an economic ecosystem. This one is an interesting suggestion, I think, because if you look at economic ecosystems, the first thing you want to do is create collaboration space. You want people talking to each other. And one of my thoughts is you don't want electrical engineering faculty sitting off in their little corner, and mechanical engineering professors sitting in their little corner, and chemistry professors sitting in a little corner. I think you should intermingle them. Diminish the identity with the department. You still have to have programs. Yes, you have programs, but you don't have to have departments so much thinking about along their narrow lines of what they do. Because you want to get chemical engineering professors and electrical engineering professors and computer science professors working together to come up with entirely new ideas, inspiring students to go start companies pursuing those ideas. This is an uphill battle. Everybody in the country, as I mentioned, is trying to figure out how to start one of these. University of New Mexico is heavy into that. They bought a building downtown Albuquerque. They're building dormitories down there so the students will, and they're bringing in entrepreneurs into the entrepreneurial center there. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but it seems like the logical thing to do. You want to get high people density. You want to get people where they interact with each other naturally, and you want to get as much diversity as you can in the work environment. So some of the ideas I'd like to go through fairly quickly, and then I'd like to open the floor for you to make suggestions about what you think Kettering might do. I think, first of all, you have to have a vision. If anything you're going to do, you should have a vision to support it. You need to have a vision, and then develop a strategic plan for realizing that vision. And I think Kettering needs to have a vision for entrepreneurship. And then they need to plan for implementing that vision. And the neat thing about it would be, if you think about it, once you start developing that plan, divide the plan up into chunks. So you can go find rich Kettering grads that might like to own that chunk. Have it named after them. I don't know what the chunk is. That's hard work to get to do what I just said. But figure out how to do it in steps so that various people, individual donors, not company donors, but individual donors can sponsor various steps in that system. You need an entrepreneurial culture. You need to bring as many people to campus as you can. I'm suggesting that you need to reduce department identity, avoid functional building identity. Don't have a EE building and a CE building and a chemistry building. Have people spread all over the place, interacting with each other, and if a student needs to come see a faculty member and you need to talk in private, have an office that people can go to. And otherwise, I would do open environment seating for people to encourage interactions. You want people talking to each other. That's why, by the way, I've talked to Kettering grads that have gone to Silicon Valley, and in fact, I routinely talk to one student, a former student that's out there, and he tells me that as soon as work is over, people go to the bars. And guess what they talk about in the bars? Their last company they started that went bankrupt, or the one they're working on. He said, that's all we talk about. We don't talk about football, we don't talk about sports, we talk about starting companies. And he said, any place you go, that's what people talk about. So that's the culture that has evolved out there. And that's the culture you try to create in an economic ecosystem. That's the conversation. Another thing that I think needs to be done, I don't know exactly how you do this, and I don't know what it would need to be, but I bet you John Gessick can figure it out. And that is, I think you should not graduate from college with a degree in engineering without knowing a lot more about software than I knew. So again, I don't know what needs to be done, but I bet you John Gessick can figure out what it is. And it would be great if every course that was taught had some small software component. Another thing that I think is very important is to start a virtual economic ecosystem. And this is a suggestion that Brian Trilly made to me. He said, I would just love to be able to communicate with Kettering students, because he said, I need to hire a couple of people that I'd love to sponsor co-op jobs. So if you started a virtual economic ecosystem, a social network, where the Kettering grads that are out there starting companies could communicate back with students and describe their experiences online to students, that would be of great value. I have one here that I think some of the faculty may not like, but so I want to make sure I cover it. I think the faculty need to be entrepreneurial. And I would suggest that one thing you need to think about is a university is a place where you go because you want to teach students and you love students. If you don't like students, you shouldn't be at a university. But not only do you do that, it's an opportunity to pursue your dream for starting a technology-based company. So I think you need to encourage faculty to be entrepreneurial. Well, how could you do that? Well, first of all, federal funding for research and development is growing very slowly. Corporate investment in research and development in the U.S. is growing 4% a year. Federal R&D is going to be lucky to hold its own. In fact, it's not even going to keep up with, and I have a slide that shows that I'm not going to show you. It's not even going to keep up with economic growth. So I think private sector, why private sector? Because you can see what companies are doing and you get a better opportunity to really get close to some of their problems. I would suggest that entrepreneurial activities should be as much as promotion criteria as service, scholarship, and teaching. I think you should, and no university does this, but faculty should be encouraged, if they go out and get a contract with the company, to take a large part of that for themselves. Another thing I think is very important is find more startup firms to sponsor co-op jobs. And some of the former Kettering co-ops that saw that idea thought that was a really great idea. Work for small startup companies. That's a great way to learn how to start your own. Okay, let me just stop there and give you a chance. Any students have any ideas? What would you like to see Kettering doing to help you become an entrepreneur? Anybody have any suggestions? Have I convinced you that being an entrepreneur is something at least you should think about? So do you have any ideas how Kettering could help you do that?
Kettering currently has the Kettering Entrepreneurship Society where they kind of tell students different aspects of entrepreneurship, and we kind of go back and forth and talk about certain ideas and how we could develop them and the roadmap we need to take. So that's a really valuable resource here at Kettering. And I think the only way that it could become more valuable is if we get more people involved, because then we have more diversity of thought.
Okay. Anybody else have any suggestions?
Dr. Gover, I'd like to see you give this exact presentation to Kettering's Board of Trustees at some point. This is so directed to this university, so thoughtful, based on your experience having been the department head here. And I agree with you completely. I think our president, Dr. McMahon, is very amenable to these things. So I would like to see our Board of Trustees at Kettering hear your presentation.
Be happy to do it.
I will certainly suggest it.
Okay.
I think this is terrific.
Yeah. Any faculty have any suggestions for what Kettering should be doing?
I think JP are doing quite a bit in that area. Masood is in charge of the Entrepreneurship Society, and we have made a lot of efforts. I sent you the new curriculum. We are trying to really push this into our curriculum. We have a program right now. And talking about mingling, I have to give a lot of credit to our friend Terry, who has helped us to get together more rather than being in one location. So Kettle has been a major place that we get together, share, and talk. And so it has been, we are working on these changes. I think we are not organized. We need a little more organization. We are doing quite a bit of that, but not enough of it.
Anybody have any questions? Anything else?
Well, there's so much in the newspapers today. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning in practice. And there's this thing about the and the 99% and all these other things. And of course, the entrepreneurs are going to be in that top 1%, no question about that. Well, what are your feelings on this sudden or emphasis now with respect to inequality, middle class, all that?
My feelings are, I wish it wasn't going to happen, but it is, and I don't think there's a lot you can do about it, except help the students, help them prepare to be in that top 1%. Or be an entrepreneur as a faculty member. I don't see, I think it's, I think as we used to say back on the farm, I think the horse is out of the barn. I don't think you can turn it around. It's a whole new form of capitalism. Masood, yeah.
I'm really excited about your talk today. I think about 80% of what you said already exists at Kettering, except it's hidden under the mission of Kettering, unfortunately, to use your language. The vision is being built and the infrastructure is in place. But I do have a specific question. In the Entrepreneur Society, in the 7 or 8 years that we've been working with the students, we've created a lot of ventures, but our biggest barrier to becoming an entrepreneur right out of schools is having two things: debt, students graduating with about $30,000, $40,000 worth of debt, and a job that's going to pay them well. Those two things are extremely tempting. So in the 7 years, we've had 2 students that took the chance and bypassed job offers and had a very wonderful entrepreneurial, short-lived adventure, and then they came back to the job market, but they wouldn't change that with anything in the world. And then eventually those seeds will grow again, I'm sure of it, that they will grow.
Let me tell you a story, Masood, that Brian Trilly told me. He said, when I graduated from Kettering, all my friends were going to work for large companies, and they were saying, oh my God, Brian, why are you taking all these risks? He said 2 years later, half of them were out of jobs because their big companies they had massive layoffs. And he said, I was making money hand over fist. They were calling me about getting a job. He said, I think the path I took was more secure than the path they took.
But you understand the magnitude
Yes.
that the student is asked to be taken. So I think there's a transitional phase that they can go through.
Masood, I think the experience of having 2 years working for a large company is an incredible experience to help the students decide if they want to be an entrepreneur or not. But I would encourage you to not look in that company based on how you're going. I mean, your salary is going up. You're getting all kinds of exciting things to do. Look at what's happening to those 55-year-olds.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Pardon?
That's good advice. Yeah. Don't get interested in the corporate ladder. Use it to pay your debts.
You might say just a comment. Starting being an entrepreneur, like skydiving, it's exciting and exhilarating. It's good. Really, that's that one moment that you have to do this. That is the point that you have. How to overcome that little hesitation from your heart.
Yeah, I can't, I wish I had something sage to say about that. I really don't. But I think that's big. And also the willingness to work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day. Most entrepreneurs work really hard.
Can we wrap up with a suggestion, please? Everyone in this room has a yellow piece of paper in front of you. You could flip it over and write advice from a faculty member, advice from a student, advice from a staff member, and provide a suggestion. So when we ask Dr. Gover to come back and talk to the Board of Trustees, we'll also have some suggestions on how to do this better at Kettering. And I want to make sure that for people who have to go to class by 1:15, that you know that we have a small gift for Dr. Gover from Kettle. It's a clock just to say thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. How nice.